Hey guys, Zomfox here, and it is finally time to do the first ever United Football League Power Rankings on the channel. Yes, I've done Power Rankings for the USFL the past 2 years, and it is finally time to do the United Football League. Now this first one is going to be the post-Super Draft Power Rankings. For this Power Rankings, it is purely based on what the team's rosters were after the Super Draft. It is January 17th when this is recording and being posted, but this is accounting for the rosters back on the 15th once all the rosters came out. Granted, there's only been a couple free agent signings, but I'm not counting those into any of the stats or anything I'm doing today. Granted, they wouldn't change anything if I did count them, like Darius Shepard going to the Battlehawks. There's going to be an image about the Battlehawks that shows a wide receiver stat that is different post Darius Shepard signing. But just note that even if I did include him or the Kimdichie signing or anything like that, none of these spots would change. But also, this is the first Power Rankings video of a new league. And if you've looked online, a lot of people have put out power rankings that are very different from each other. Whether it be the Renegades as high as like 3rd or as low as 8th, whether it be the Battlehawks being in the top 3 or in the bottom 3, there's a lot of differences. So if you disagree with any of my power rankings, let me know what you think down below in the comments and why you would have teams at certain places. And the last thing before we get into the power rankings, for this year we are doing something new with every single power rankings video, and that is we're going to be doing sort of like what ESPN does, where there's going to be a secondary extra stat, player position, player or something to talk about. Essentially, this week is going to be the best position group for each team. We're going to be doing different ones of these for every single time we do a Power Rankings video, which we'll do this one now, probably one during the preseason, and then we'll do the weekly Power Rankings. So be on the lookout for all the different ones we're going to do. But without further ado, let's get started with the UFL Power Rankings for the post-Super Draft with number 8, the Michigan Panthers. Yeah, Mike, I hope you can try and convince me this team should be higher in the comments. But in all honesty, I have them at 8 as the weakest team in the UFL. Now, part of this might be actually because I'm a Panthers fan, but the fact is I look at all their additions and I'm not really too impressed because of what they lost. Essentially, as you can see here, is in terms of the big losses, whether it be because we didn't protect them in the draft, they left in free agency, or they went to the NFL, all the massive gains we got kind of are overshadowing the losses we have. Like gaining Corey Coleman. Yes, we gained a top 3 receiver in the entire league, but we lost our number 1 weapon in Joe Walker. So unlike the Battlehawks, for instance, who got Ja'Cour Pearson but still have Hakeem Butler, we got the Ja'Cour Pearson type player but lost the Hakeem Butler type of guy. That's the same for running backs. We have lost both Stevie Scott and Reggie Corbin. And while we did gain Matt Colburn and Wes Hills, who I think overall are upgrades over the guys they're replacing, it's still not as big a deal as getting Wes Hills, keeping Reggie, and getting Colburn. And the same goes for losing Gidna and Perry to the NFL and getting guys like Gerard Fernandez and Danny Etling. Fernandez is a great linebacker, but he ain't no Gidna. And Danny Etling is, as a projected starting quarterback, he is the second weakest in the entire league. There is one team that does have a weaker projecting starting quarterback, but he is pretty low on that list. I mean, he is the second worst, I think. As that's the big one. They don't really have a legit quarterback right now. They're pretty much banking on EJ Perry coming back. Like I said before, this video does not include the, oh, well, if they had their quarterback, where they'd be ranked. Because naturally, if the Panthers did have EJ Perry and Gidna, they'd move up a spot or two. But as of right now, I have them at 8. They didn't get a ton of talent overall when you consider how much they lost. So while the talent they did get was really good in terms of their overall net gain talent, it's not really as high as a lot of other teams are. They do have a coach that is as I put in my ranking, a slightly below average head coach. And I think that overall the Panthers, I think that they are going to be better as a team than they were last year. But considering the fact they're in a league where pretty much every single team is better than who they played last year in their division, yeah, that's not good. Now, I will say that their most impressive position group is by far their DBs. This is where they had the most amount of additions that were real big deals. They kept pretty much all their already good defensive backs, but they gained a lot of good ones. Look, they have 16 defensive backs on their roster at the moment, with 4 of those guys having had 2 interceptions this past season. That's a pretty big deal. They have a USFL champion in Nate Brooks, who they were able to steal from the Stallions. And most importantly, they have the 2 2022 All-USFL safeties, Shalem Luani and Bryce Tornadin. That was big. Getting both those guys in the dispersal draft was a pretty big deal, because even though they weren't All-USFL this past season, they're still 2 of the top 5, at worst, top 10 best safeties in the entire league, and you got them both. The Panthers' defensive back group is by far the best in the entire league, and this is the one area that the team is really excelling at. And that's why this is definitely the best position group. Now, coming in at number 7 is going to be the San Antonio Brahmas. Seen a lot of people put the Brahmas at 8. I do think they are a very weak team compared to the rest of them, but I do think they are a bit better than the Panthers, mainly because they do have two legit starting quarterbacks. Look, they drafted Quinton Dormady, who's clearly going to be the starting quarterback. You don't draft him as early as you did in that to not keep him. But even if you don't, you still have Jack Cohn, who I know a lot of people weren't a fan of Jack Cohn, but he still is a better starter than what two other teams have in their roster currently. So you're pretty set there. Dormady is also a bit controversial to some people, but I think he's going to be a really solid fit here. But the team last year went 3-7, missed the postseason. They got a new coach who's a massive upgrade over what they had. But the issue is they had a very weak dispersal draft. Their dispersal draft was primarily used on getting Roughnecks who may or may not have actually played for the Roughnecks, as they ended up drafting 25 former Roughnecks across both drafts, which even DeFilippo didn't draft that many former Breakers. The one good thing is, though, they did get Cody Latimer to go with Dormady, who was Dormady's number one weapon in Orlando this past season. So that was a really great pick, and that's pretty much the main reason I have him above the Panthers. They have an outstanding tight end who already has great chemistry with the quarterback, whereas the Panthers don't really have a quarterback and have no chemistry. Now, the best position group for the Brahmas was honestly not that hard to find. It's clearly the linebacking position. When you have a former All-XFL player in Jordan Williams to go with having the two leaders in tackles in Jordan Williams and Devontae Beckett, you're pretty solid. They have 10 total linebackers on the roster. Like I said, the big thing is that you have two of the top guys. When you have the number one and number two leaders in tackles, that's a pretty big deal. Now, while I do think there is one team that has a better group of linebackers, I think that this team's biggest strength is definitely linebackers. Really solid. Now, coming in at number 6 is going to be St. Louis Battlehawks. Look, this team, I've seen a lot of people put them really high, but let's be clear. This team, this is their ceiling with their current quarterback situation. Look, I've seen a lot of people trying to act as if Nick Tiano is this all-time great quarterback. I'm not even joking. I've seen people say he was really great. Look, this is by far the weakest QB room in the league. This is definitely weaker than the Panthers roster. Davis Cheek would probably be the starter over here. Look, Tiano's one game he played in where he had to start was a late season game against the Vipers. It took him to go to OT to beat them. That's already a big, big issue when you have to go to overtime against the Vipers. And two, he didn't really play that good. He had a couple really solid throws, but he had a couple of bad interceptions, and he had a sub 60 completion percentage. When you have a sub 60 passer rating with the receiving core this team did have last year, as they did have Hakeem Butler, that's not good. He is not a starter on any other team in the league, and they are pretty much banking on McCarron coming back. Because if McCarron comes back, this team jumps spots because of what we're going to get to in a second with their best position group. But with Tiano as their starter, they're this low. Though they are higher than the Panthers and even the Brahmas, because the rest of their offense is just so great. This is pretty much going to be, if Tiano is the starter, a carry job by the rest of the offense. But rather than a team like the Panthers, which have a couple great skill position players, pretty much the whole Battlehawks offense is great. And their defense was great too. They had a couple solid, not outstanding, but solid drafts where they bolstered up the defense. And during the offseason, they added the XFL Defensive Player of the Year. So they are really loaded up everywhere pretty much except quarterback, which, is the most important position. And they have, who I think is the second weakest head coach. Granted, as I said before, just like with these teams, the gap from the top to the bottom isn't nearly as bad as it was the XFL or USFL last year, but still they have one of the weaker coaches and they have the weakest quarterback room. But they do have the best wide receiver group in the league. This is also their best group by a mile. I mean, you have 2 All-XFL players in Hakeem Butler and Ja'Cory Pearson. You have 3 of the top 5 receptions leaders this past season, because you also got to add Blake Jackson. You've got 6 wide receivers on the roster. And like I said, this was before we've heard about the addition of Darius Shepard, which when you add that guy, you end up having 4 of the top 5 receptions leaders and another All-XFL player, though he wasn't a receiver. But again, they don't really have a quarterback. McCarron was unbelievable this past season. If they get him back, this team moves up spots, plural, at least 2. Without McCarron, this is all I can put him at, because it's not like their backup is the Stallions' backup, J'Mar Smith, who is a starter on pretty much all but like one of these teams. This isn't, going from a great quarterback to another great quarterback or a great to a good. You're going from a great quarterback to a guy that in the one game he played in didn't look that good. So, Battlehawks, number 6. Then at number 5, the Houston Roughnecks. Seen people put this team up as high as 3. I'm not going to go that far right now. Let's just look at it. Their starting quarterback, solid Kenji Bahar. Their backup, not as much. But Kenji Bahar, when you look at him, a lot of people like to hate on him for pretty much having 3 bad games. Because last year he had 7 games where he was anywhere from solid to great, but he had 3 terrible games. Those 3 terrible games were a huge reason they missed the playoffs because 2 of them were the start of the year without Mark Thompson, and they went 0-2 in that stretch. But the fact is this team upgraded their O-line. They had an unbelievable dispersal draft. I would say, aside from the Showboats who just got a bunch of oh my god type of players, they had the best dispersal draft in the Roughnecks. But their super draft is pretty questionable. Picking a kicker as early as they did who isn't even the best kicker available, but only getting him because he also doubles as a punter. That'll be interesting to see if that ends up working out for them, getting the guy that's, a two-way player rather than just getting the best kicker available. And then drafting a running back in the first round when you already have the best running back in the league and one of the best backup running backs in the league in TJ Pledger. But the other thing is the fact that this team did add a guy like Isaiah Henney. And even though their head coach, I think, is the weakest head coach, what I said in the coach's video, he is the wide receiver guy. This guy proved to be great with receivers, and they gave him Isaiah Henney. So this offense will be scary. Yes, could they have a better quarterback? Sure. But are you really going to go get a guy like Troy Williams who would have to learn this system, or would you rather keep the guy that was there last year and now is going to get better pieces around him? Obviously, this team should be high. It's just, I don't know. I think the 4 teams ahead of them, one of them is debatable. At least 3 of them have to be above this team. But I will say their best position group is the D-line, and I think this is the best position group of any team by far. The wide receiver for the Battlehawks is close, but when you're talking about 4 former All-USFL players, yes, if they use these 4 guys, their starting D-line in a 4-3 formation are all former All-USFL players. Reggie Howard Jr., Chris Odom, and Toby Johnson were 2022 All-USFL players, and Adam Rodriguez and Toby Johnson were both 2023 All-USFL players. Toby Johnson is pretty much considered the best DT in all of spring football. Chris Odom, in the 1 year he played in spring football, had, I believe, the best season in modern-day spring football history, and arguably should have won MVP over KaVontae Turpin if it wasn't for the fact the Gamblers, couldn't finish games and their offense wasn't hella mid. They have 2 of the top 5 USFL sack leaders this past season in Keontae Shad and Adam Rodriguez. That's not even talking about all the other great players they got. They got Olive Sagapalu from the Maulers, signed to the Generals. They got a few other guys as well. This team's D-line is unbelievable. They got Glenn Logan from the Roughnecks, the other Roughnecks, the one that got cut. So when you look at this team's D-line, it's unbelievable. This is where you get to the really good teams. The Roughnecks are the start of what I believe are the 5 best teams in the UFL. This is the top 5. I feel like the Battlehawks, Brahmas, and Panthers are far and away the bottom 3 until the Panthers or Battlehawks get a quarterback, until the Brahmas do anything. But this team is really good. It's just, there's a couple things. Can Bahar play great for a full season? Can the rest of the defense live up to this insane D-line? We'll see. This should be a really fun team to watch, though. Then number 4 is going to be the Renegades. Honestly, this one feels like this was hard. I just kind of put him here because I don't honestly know where else to put him. Look, I've seen people, even the United Football Media, one of the biggest spring football networks there are, put the Renegades at 8 and had somebody vote them number 1. Think about that. And I've seen many other different people, whether it be some dude, whether it be a top Instagram account, put this team anywhere from the bottom to the top. Because they're just so hard to judge. You look at their roster, you're like, this is solid, but I feel every team is better at so many different places. You look at the quarterback situation, you say, Luis Perez, awesome, why did you draft Scott? The drafts, I think, were mediocre. I think both of them were pretty mediocre. Now, the Lindsey Scott pick, I've grown to like it since the initial time. I still think they should have gotten Pearson instead, but you got a quarterback that every other XFL team would have died for, and you got him. So that was a big deal. It's an FU to the other 3 teams, which arguably is the best kind of pick. And he provides great insurance policy, because I assume he will be the backup. Let him learn the system, keep Perez as the starter. If Perez gets hurt or plays bad, then you have a great backup that is good enough to be a starter in Lindsey Scott Jr. The one part of the team that I think is truly weak is tight end. Their only tight end on the roster, unless they, transition some guys back to tight end or something, is Gerard Scott, who is an unproven guy. We talked about it. He didn't get really that much opportunity because he was playing with Sage Surratt. But Sal Cannella was the number one receiver of this team. Now, their number one wide receiver did come back, but Sal Cannella is gone. That's a big deal. I have this team at 4. Now, their best position group, I went with running backs. There's a couple positions you could argue because not a single group is severely, insanely good, but none of them are really terrible outside of tight end. But yes, I'm putting this team, so running back is their best group. Because of the top 16 XFL leading rushers, they have 4 of them. They have a guy at 4th in De'Veon Smith. They've got 8th in Devin Darrington. They got Morgan Ellison at 11th and Letty Brown at 16th. They have 5 total running backs on the roster, and 4 of these guys were in the top 16 of rushing leaders this past season. So they have a really solid backfield. Okay, you keep Smith as the starter, you get Darrington to be a backup, and then you have Ellison and Brown as your 3rd and 4th string. That's crazy. Really good room. Though I would say, of being a best position group, this is probably the weakest of all of them, but it is still a really solid group, and is pretty much the best way to describe the Renegades. Really solid, but weaker than a lot of other teams, but not everywhere, but at the same time everywhere. Really weird. Now, number 3 is going to be the Showboats. Look, some people are saying it's hype. Let's just cut that out. This team added arguably the best spring football quarterback in Case Cookus, who in a down year with no offensive line and a terrible running game still was one of the best spring football quarterbacks this past year. They added arguably the best running back, though I don't think he is, in Darius Victor. I think he's a top 2, top 3, but I think Thompson's better. You added both those guys. You added other receivers. You improved your defense. Got guys like Will Likely on that defense. You drafted a bunch of former Breakers. Who, remember, the Breakers were at worst the 4th best team in all of spring football this past year. At best, the 2nd best team. You improved the O-line, which was the biggest weakness of the Stars. And you're coming off a 5-5 record playing in an insanely good division. You upgraded your head coach. This team is going to be good. And yes, I am putting special teams as their best position group. Because even though it's technically not a position group, let's be real here. The special teams is insane. Well, you got 2 kickers on roster, so whoever does better in training camp, or if DeFilippo just wants to go with his guys, you've got Conklin and Kessman. You got 2 punters in White and Wright, who Wright was really good the first year, the second year not as much. Matt White, we've talked about him in the previous videos about the drafts. But then you brought back White and Conklin's long snapper, and you're talking about a team that has 3 guys who did kick return duties, with Vinny Papella as well, who was the special team all-USFL guy, Dylan, who was the USFL Special Teams Player of the Year, and the USFL leader in field goal percentage in Matt Conklin. This team's special teams is really good and by far the best in the entire league. This is going to be really scary to watch them on special teams, as they're pretty much guaranteed to win that battle every single week. So they've already got a leg up in one of the 3 sides of the ball. That's a really big deal. Really good. I think this team does deserve to be 3rd. It's hard to put a team like the Gamblers above them when the Showboats have a better coach, better quarterback, better special teams. Roughnecks may have a better D-line and a better running back, but or the Renegades, the Showboats got a better running back in Darius Victor. They got a better quarterback, arguably, in Case Cookus. They've got arguably a better coach, though I don't think so. But again, it's hard to have another team argue to beat this team on paper. Because granted, a lot of this is on paper, because a lot of these guys haven't played together, but their new head coach has a lot of the guys he did play with, or he did coach the last season. So, number 3, the Showboats. The number 2, the Defenders. This is pretty much for 2 reasons, because I've seen a lot of people seemingly hate this team. Number 1, Jalen McClendon is better than a lot of these other quarterbacks that people are making a big deal about. McClendon played in a few games on a terrible Vipers team and played significantly well. He had really solid stats all around, throwing to pretty much nobody on a terrible team with terrible coaching. You're now bringing him to a team that has who I think is the 2nd best head coach in Reggie Barlow. You're putting him on a team that just made it to the championship game. You have another quarterback in DeAndre Francois, who, granted, if Te'amu comes back, he's getting demoted to the 3rd string, all likelihood. But all in all, you're talking about a guy in McClendon who showed he was that guy for a few games in the Vipers. If people want to hate on him, then you're pretty much saying Dormady is literal garbage if you think McClendon is just bad. I mean, McClendon would easily be the starter in St. Louis. He'd easily be the starter to me in San Antonio. I think that the defenders ended up getting arguably the best quarterback overall because Scott is a hope he develops well. Because as a right now guy, you could even argue McClendon's better than that. Granted, that's a right now guy, not a, he knows the system. So, yes, this team would like to have Jordan Ta'amu back, but they don't need to have him back in a sense. This isn't like the Battlehawks who have now pretty much hamstrung themselves to needing McCarron back. Yes, they could get some of the free agent quarterbacks that are available. So we'll see how that plays out. But the defenders as well had very underrated drafts, especially the dispersal draft. I talked about it. Nobody wanted to give him credit for it, but they had a really great draft because they didn't draft the flashy guys. They drafted picks that were smart. Think smarter, not harder. And that is why they have an insane pass rush. 4 players that had 4 or more sacks this past season. They had the XFL leader in sacks at 9.5 in Trent Harris. They have 2 all-XFL players in Davin Bellamy and Trent Harris. Davin Bellamy is one of the best DNs in all of spring football. Trent Harris is an unbelievable outside linebacker. You added these 2 guys, or you have these 2 guys now on your team. They're going to be good. They got another few really great roughnecks as well. They got one of Harris's running mates. This team's pass rush is going to be incredible. This is the only pass rush that really could rival the just pure insanity of the D-line that the Roughnecks have. I mean, it's insane. And I think that overall, though, this Defenders team, I think everyone's trying to underrate them for some reason, whether it be because, Battlehawks fans just hate them, whether it be because people don't like the Lemon stuff, or because people hate how they lost to the Renegades in the championship. The bottom line is the Defenders are the second best team in the UFL right now. But we all know who number 1 is. The Birmingham Stallions. Yes, even in the UFL, it is still just like old times, where pretty much 90% of the power rankings, number 1 is the Stallions. There is no argument for them to be anywhere else, in my opinion. I do not understand when people put any other team above them. I don't care if you're putting the Showboats because of what if, the Renegades because they're a champion, the Defenders. The Stallions, until proven otherwise, are the team to beat in spring football. J'Mar Smith would start on almost every team. Would he start in the Panthers? Yes. Would he start on the Brahmas? Yes. Would he start in the Battlehawks? Yes. Would he start in the Roughnecks? Yes. Would he start on the Showboats? Maybe not. Probably not. Would he start over the Defenders? No. He would be the starter on every team but the Showboats, when you think about it. When you actually think about it, every team but the Showboats, he's starting. Now, yes, the Renegades, you could debate that. But all I remember is when the 2 of them dueled in that, famous Week 1 game, J'Mar came out on top. Now, granted, they both played exceptionally well in championship games. One of them got hurt. So you've got pretty much the Showboats and maybe the Renegades he wouldn't start for. And that's saying that Magoo doesn't come back, because if Magoo came back, he starts anywhere. So this team doesn't even need Magoo to come back, because their backup is Adrian Martinez, one of their draft picks. He's going to be a really solid quarterback if he gets the opportunity. But granted, he's the same as Lindsey Scott. He has to prove it before we actually say anything. But J'Mar Smith is an elite quarterback. He's one of the elite spring football quarterbacks. We also need to forget how good he was in year 1 of the USFL, and that he was the starter this past season. He just got hurt. The Stallions roster is loaded. Their only legit weakness was kicker. That's not even a joke. Their only weakness was kicker this offseason. So their draft is pretty much to slightly improve everywhere or get minor holes filled. Their best position group, I'm just putting it in linebacker. For pretty much the same reason I had in my why they should pick Vontae Diggs section of my video that I made about the first round of the draft. Because they have Scooby Wright, who when healthy is great. It's just that he's always hurt. But if he's healthy, you have him and then 2 all-USFL players in Kayava Tizino and Chris Orr, who know Orr and Tizino were 2nd and 3rd in tackles this past season on your team. Yes, the depth isn't, as good as the starting group or the depth of, the D-line groups we've talked about, or the DBs and the Panthers. But this starting trio of Wright, Orr, and Tizino, man, is that scary. You're not really going to get any long runs against this team, especially if you run inside the box. You're just not. So you have an unbelievably great trio. And again, this team improved pretty much everywhere. They got Hercules at defensive tackle. They were able to improve at the DBs as well. They got a couple other weapons on offense. They still have guys like Jay Sternberger on their team. This team is going to be good. They really are. They are the team to beat until they are beaten multiple times in a row. They're not dropping this list. Unless they go out in week 1 and get shelled like 40-2 against the Renegades, they're not dropping on this list. This team is just so good, so dominant compared to every other team. They have to be number 1. So that'll do it for my power rankings for the UFL, the first ever UFL power rankings on the channel, as well as having, the extra little difference of having a certain, extra thing to talk about each team. Let me know if you guys like this down below. If you have any suggestions for what you want the next one to be, whether you want the next one to be where their quarterback ranks, or what player has the most potential on the team or something like that, let me know down in the comments below. Again, if you disagree with this list, let me know down in the comments below why and who. And then also, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Be notified as soon as I upload any videos. We still have a lot of videos to come out. Just in the next week, we've got a video talking about all the teams that got shelved, as well as UFL shop suggestions. And we're still waiting to see the rules or the schedule come out. We're expecting those to come out within this week or at worst next week. And as always, guys, have a great night.